Yeah, we'll send it before.
Well, you guys are first, right?
Yeah, we'll send it before.
Yeah. But you guys are speaking first.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whatever I want to say.
Alright, so can I start now?
Yeah.
Good morning. Hi, Judge. I'm Akshay, and I represent EVHS. And me and my partner negate the resolution. The UK should join the EU. Contention 1. AI innovation. Currently, the UK is thriving in AI. Government on Decree 25 reports the UK is the third largest AI market in the world, valued at $92 billion, larger than any other country. By 2025, sales of the UK AI sector ballooned 85% in just 2 years to 5,800 companies, growing 150 times faster than the broader economy. Rejoining the EU would crush this success. Also, 24 explains UK businesses would face the EU AI Act, which imposes burdensome costs on AI providers, especially small businesses, stifling innovation while making learning safer. The costs are staggering. Mueller 21 found the AI Act will cost Europe 31 billion euros over 5 years and reduce AI investment by almost 20%. European small businesses face compliance costs up to 400,000 euros, causing profits to decline by 40%. Schneider 24 warns these regulations will cause European companies to fall behind the US and China. PwC projects that by 2030, AI will boost England's GDP by 10.6%, with extra household consumption of £1,800 to £2,300 annually. Rejoin would stop these gains. But here's the life or death impact. The UK 24 government announced AI tech that locates cancer cells 2.5 times bigger than doctors alone, and is rolling out to heavily advanced radiology market, already using 90% disposable units. This will help cut NHS waiting lists and help thousands of cancer patients get faster treatment. And just a few weeks ago, the UK government announced the AI Growth Lab, which executes the UK's new dynamic regulatory framework and specifically designed to slash waiting times and reduce penalties. EU regulations would kill this process. Tower 25 explains AI medical devices in Europe face 2 separate legal regimes with 3 inconsistent systems. From August 2027, devices need high-risk AI compliance. There's a shortage of certification bodies, leading to backlogs and delays requiring more time, cost, and resources. The impact: delays kill cancer patients. EU regulations create bureaucratic delays without improving safety. Every delay means more patients die early. Rejoining means squeezing red tape over saving lives twice. Contention 2. Eurozone. Right 20 establishes that joining the euro is required for new member states to enter the EU in order to fully leave, since it would have no opt-outs. Millions of people in all member states, which is unlikely in the status quo. The euro is broken to destroy. 23 explains the UK determined the euro failed 5 critical tests. Loss of powers concentrated with the European Central Bank, which sets one policy for everyone, reducing countries' ability to react to their conditions. Freedom 16, a Harvard economist, confirms the eurozone has a disastrous one-size-fits-all monetary policy. Result: the European economy is doing worse than in the Great Depression, with youth unemployment at 20% overall and above 40% in some countries. This is bad for the UK specifically. Batanker 17 explains 2008 hit the UK harder due to financial sector exposure. The ECB increased rates too early for the UK, risking double recession. UK housing has many variable mortgages, making people extremely sensitive to rate changes. From 2008 to 10, the 20% sterling devaluation restored competitiveness. Without this, the recession would have been much worse. In the euro, these tools disappear. No devaluation possible, and when the next financial crisis hits, the UK is trapped. Can't cut rates, can't devalue, can't escape. With the UK's massive financial sector and sensitive housing market, wrong ECB can worsen the crisis. And unlike 2008, there would be no way out. Contention 3. Trade. UK 25 government reports the UK signed 40 trade agreements with 74 countries. The UK-Australia deal alone increases trade by 53%, boosts the economy £2.3 billion, and adds £900 million to household wages. Tech UK 25 states that the UK joined CPTPP, a bloc of Asia-Pacific countries, in December 2024, first European country to join. The UK is the second largest economy in the partnership with £12 trillion. Over 99% of UK goods at CPTPP countries are tariff-free. McBride 24 explains, unlike the EU, the CPTP doesn't require adopting its regulations. The UK, of course, only started the CPTP laws, and the UK does not pay membership fees. Rejoining stops this. Figure 17, the EU Commission recommends all member states make negotiations. Member states do not negotiate for the whole year. Rejoining forces the UK to abandon any contribution to member considerations. UK should not pay any fees for
And then I'm sending case right now. I just sent. Let me know when you guys get it. Did you guys get it?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh yeah, we got it.
Okay, you guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Judge, are you ready? My time will start on my first word. Our first contention is secession. The Scottish National Party is narrowly ahead. Small 25 states that the SNP independence 52 has grown 52%, as Labour has fallen out and devoured by Reform 26, and the independence bloc of SNP and Greens have majority dragged under by Starmer, as it is too late to change the leader of the SNP is the most trusted. Brexit drive support. It's comparably the largest. NCSR 24 states that the Brexit is a key role in Scottish independence intertwined, now 3 times as more likely, as Scots believe that EU is more beneficial than any other smaller difference on other UK decisions. To leave, this has a significant impact. Victory ensures secession. Sky 25 states that Sweeney called a referendum on independence, elected as 2026. Many eligible that were too young to vote in 2014 make a pivotal government move that, if failed to deliver, will cause disaster. Starmer says yes, as Ramsey 25 states that previous occasion a referendum was easy to deny. But however, Starmer now holds a different party and most seats in Scotland, and it's hardly likely to endure the electorate. Secession causes war, as Ibrahim 21 states that independent political disasters neutralize UK military and diplomatic war as nuclear deterrent in disarray, and Scotland is a vulnerability opportunity for China and Russia, as the SNP's close ties to Kremlin fund anyone who is ready to undermine West China and bend to geopolitical designs. Port in Scotland, as it is a critical hole in the defense umbrella, consequences wash up on US shores. Movements cascade. As Patterson 14 states that a map of Europe would have to be quickly redrawn among NATO countries, history of secession as an independent Scotland quickly to reignite old flames would not take much for movement to grow in Quebec, Kosovo, Sudan, Somaliland, and Asia. Nuclear war, as all hotspots escalate, as Shaddad 8 states that self-determination bring out about a nationalist backlash or collapse of institutions followed by the outbreak of civil wars. Nukes constitute a major threat as conflicts escalate by drawing in powers. Others encourage conflicts spill over borders, and self-determination threatens peace. Extinction, as SAR 15 states that nuclear strike lead to an all-out global war, a global nuclear war. Anti-gravitational effect of the rise of water became a dead planet, and the most secure underground facility will not save us. Advantage to Somalia, as Brexit created a focus shift for UK policy. CSREP 20 stated that it forced the UK to develop new policies in Africa to mitigate economic effects to trade, and the main instrument of UK's serious rival to the EU. As Al-Shabaab risk is rising, FTL 25 states that the Al-Shabaab increased attacks by 50% as recapture strategic town following withdrawal forces. The ATMIS is the root cause. Williams 24 says that the absence of ATMIS as Al-Shabaab's advantage in the SNA fragmented and disseminate strategic messages, superior morale. The departure of ATMIS leave Al-Shabaab stronger militarily. The drawdown occurred due to lack of EU support, as Sheikh 24 states that the ATMIS stated by December 31st on EU top funder is concerned about long-term financing and EU's reducing contributions, competing priorities including Ukraine and Gaza. The UK is K2 pushing EU counterterror, as Daywall 16 states that Brexit leaving Britain with fraction of influence in Africa. Britain gained a great leverage in Somalia. London been forced behind stabilizing country, leaving void Britain outside exercised influence on policy for Somalia, ensuring EU funds protect from al-Shabaab. If absent action, al-Shabaab is a terror on America. DOJ 24 states that conspiring to commit transnational act of terror, al-Shabaab America attack reminiscent of September 11 relentlessly pursue goals on the cusp, nuclear war, as Blair 16 states a 9/11 event would evoke a right to attack right away as restraints to a nuclear are swept aside and gloves off a barrier first low. Independently, unchecked al-Shabaab action causes instability as al-Equity 24 states that al-Shabaab escalated expansion in the Horn of Africa as al-Shabaab aimed to extend operations to destabilize the regional actions in Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia. Instability goes nuclear as Finnegan 20 states that Africa conflicts erupt, violence and tensions stir up on nuclear leaders and arms control and negotiations lower barrier to a nuclear war hotspot and spill over devolve to U.S. war interests from Red Sea to Europe to a cross-supply extinction via SAR. You guys ready for class? Yeah. Okay. Do you want to start first or can I?
Yeah, I'll start.
Okay.
Are you singing prep?
No.
Huh? No, it's not. Okay. So on Atmos, your card says both EU and US finance means applies on Atmos. As such, how can you say that only EU financing grants affected Atmos Party?
Well, because during when the UK was in the EU, they were the biggest kind of advocate for putting for counterterrorism on al-Shabaab. They were the only one kind of capping al-Shabaab and holding them back. But after the UK left EU, it kind of removed that cap, and so now the EU changed its focus to other things in Ukraine and Gaza, but that just gave leeway into al-Shabaab growing and rising. Okay, can I take a question?
Before you do, I just want to ask, but it also talks about the
Wait,
US.
but I answered your question.
Right.
This is another one. Okay, so you talk a lot about inconsistency with medications and things like that. What exactly is inconsistency? You never really explained. Can you give me an example of what that is?
Okay, well, inconsistencies mean that, there is a shortage of medical drugs, and it's also conflicting legal regimes.
No. I'm asking for an example in the EU where they're showing inconsistency with medical drugs. Are they inconsistent with France or what is give me an example of them actually being inconsistent?
Okay, as I said, there's two different AI regimes for regulations. The CAR 25 states this.
But I'm asking about the NHS.
I know. I'm answering you.
So you don't have a statistic or anything? Because I'm asking for a statistic.
Okay. Statistic on what?
On inconsistency.
I don't understand.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. You can have a question.
Okay. How does Starmer's Labour Party having the most seats in Scotland show that he supports Scottish independence?
Okay, because he's literally been talking about in my part I talked about Sweeney's calling a referendum on independence if elected in 2026. That is the SNP party that they're calling for independence. My card literally states that. Sky 25. Go ahead and check.
Okay, but that doesn't answer my question.
That does answer your question. I'm literally saying that he's calling for independence when he's elected.
Yeah, but we're talking about Starmer, not SNP.
Starmer is part of the SNP.
Alright,
Okay,
but no,
wait.
he's not.
No, he's not?
He's not. He's part of Labour.
Is he? No, I'm.
It's in case.
It's in
like
case.
the top 2 parties. Like I'll clear the
Yeah. Can I take it? Well, that's okay. You also talk about. You talk about small businesses. How many small businesses will be affected?
Well, a majority of them. Isn't he mad about numbers?
Does it matter about numbers?
I have to. Is end of.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine.
Are you guys taking prep?
Yeah. Well, I'll be taking some more prep. That's for you. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Dougherty. I'm the second speaker for Dougherty Valley on the net. So as a brief off-time roadmap before the 4-minute rebuttal, we'll be going over their case, and then we'll be going over our case, and then we'll be summarizing the debate. So 3, 2, 1, now. Okay, answer to Scotland. Number 1, the SNP was obsessed with independence alone, but the movement is over right now. It failed. During 24 says any obsession with a single issue is time limited. The SNP government drove to independence. Scotland continued to debate independence to the exclusion of all else. The SNP only exists to break up the UK. The nationalists have been in power too long to change for any change in direction to feel genuine. There won't be a second referendum in the foreseeable future because not that many people want one. Contending for independence requires the Scottish SNP to pass a second referendum for independence, which isn't going to happen. McDonald 24 says that the SNP has fallen from grace over the last 3 years. Momentum toward independence has stalled. With no second referendum in sight, the party of independence is in chaos. The independence movement failed. The only party that supports independence is also failing. Don't let AP have any access to their independence. Secession failed. Previous nationalists have all tried, but all without success. SNP is unlikely to be able to deliver. The UK government will not concede a referendum to the SNP because the SNP only has the support of only about a third of the voters. Now, Swinney could form a minority government next May, but not a coalition with the majority. Referendum is doomed to fail for this reason, and it is off the table. Swinney struggles to make compromises, and it's likely that he will face leadership change. SNP's most prominent woman has stepped away. And then this is the most important part. Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, has said no, and as such, the SNP has dropped independence to focus on more important issues. Sanderson 25 says the SNP has dropped demands for new independence. Swinney instead focused on jobs, energy security, and the cost of living. Regardless of the Hollywood elections, he could not imagine a new referendum. This goes against their card, which only talks about how Starmer's party, Labour, which not SNP, Starmer is a member of the Labour Party, but the fact that Labour Party has the most seats in Scotland doesn't mean that Starmer accepts Scottish independence. This card alone says that the SNP have privately dropped the demands to Starmer for independence, and that they're instead focusing on more important issues. And then on the point about Somalia, so they claim that the EU dropped their support for assets because of Brexit, but their own card says that both the EU and the US, not just the EU, but the EU and the US, dropped their funds for activists because they wanted to focus on more important issues like Gaza and Somalia. Their own card doesn't say that it was because of Brexit, it says that it's because they wanted to focus on other areas. This alone means that it wasn't due to Brexit. As such, their impact of Somalia don't stand. So now going on to our contention. So let's go over our contention. So right now we're saying that with the AI contention, with our AI contention, this AI contention is multifold. So we're saying if that the UK rejoins the EU, then they will have to face the EU AI Act and the conflicting medical regimes that the EU has in order for like these AI regulations. Like for example, our Talk Card 25 card says that the EU has two separate legal regimes, the EU AI Act and the EU Medical Device Regulations Act, MDR, which has glaring inconsistencies, which will prevent the successful regulation of the technologies, the AI technologies that the UK is developing, like the technology that can detect cancer cells 2.5 times quicker, which is helping to save tens of thousands of cancer patients. And because the UK has a more dynamic regulatory framework compared to the EU, they also have recent advancements that include the UK AI Growth Lab, which executes this dynamic framework for the benefits of the general British people in terms of AI. For example, impacts of these include reducing the NHS wait time list and helping get more treatment to more people. On Eurozone, if the UK rejoins the EU, then they will not have access to the opt-outs that they had when they first joined the EU. As such, they would have to adopt the euro, and that they would lose financial independence over their financial system. Because they're very close to the financial sector, any changes in interest rates made by the ECB, which affect all European countries, it would affect the UK much more than it would to other countries. As we've shown in the 2008 recession, if we went by the ECB, then the UK would have fallen to a double-dip recession, which would have affected millions of British people. And then on contention free on trade, after leaving the EU, the UK has been able to negotiate tailor-made deals with 74 countries. Access to the second large, along with access to the CPTPP. So, for these reasons, yours and
Can I call for the can I call for two cards? One is the Starmer says no, and then the other one is
Okay, if you go to the document I sent earlier, there's a new tab called developers, and those two cards are good.
In the same doc that you shared. Okay. Then I'll be taking prep. Time starts now. That's 40 seconds of prep. My name is Liz for Emerald. I'm the second speaker on the executive side. Is anyone not ready? Okay. The order of my speech will be frontlining, frontlining their responses and then going back and responding on the Okay. If everyone's good, then time will start when I do this word. Let's get on their responses first. They said that Scotland won't be able to have a secession because it failed in the past. Their evidence from 2024 saying that secession failed in the past, but our uniqueness is from 2025. And insofar as that's true, it's really clear that secession is on the way, and our evidence is recent. So their evidence is just pretty much how secession failed in the past. Then they say people don't want it. Look to our evidence first. It says that 52% of the labor fallen out of favor by devoured by reform in 2026, and it says how independents, bloc of the S&P and Greens have a majority dragged under by Starmer. It shows that the majority of people actually do want it. Then they say that Starmer says no, but our evidence is from 2025. I read you in case that and we'll concede that Starmer says no. That kicks out any of the turns there. Then they say that the secession won't be possible, but per our evidence from Sky 2025, it says that Sweeney called for a referendum on independence elected at 2026. We're seeing that Sweeney's going to be guaranteeing a referendum, not Starmer. Then on Somalia, they have one response. They can't bring up any new response in summer. You're not going to buy anything in the future, but they tell you that EU has a job support. Read our card. It tells you that Brexit has forced the UK to develop new policies in Africa to mitigate economic effects. Trade, the main instrument is the UK's serious rival to the EU. It literally says it in the card. It's highlighted. We're telling you that Brexit is the one that forced EU to shift its policies, and the only way they can solve back for that is by voting out, because the UK is the forefront. They want to boost counterterror. They're the only country in the EU, or one of the major ones, that actually want to prevent counterterror, to boost counterterror. So if you this response really doesn't apply. Then on AI, we tell you that their article comes from the CDW. That's a tech consultancy that benefits ladder regulations. Of course, their evidence is going to argue for ladder regulations. Then then the Chan 24 states that the code of practice with all negative effects that they claim are both voluntary take at least a year to go into effect. Then on more AI, they tell you that there's AI they tell you that the AI policies are bad right now, but we tell you that there's a lack of funding and the immigrants that are thumping it. The UK funding is harder. Brexit obstacle tech talent, obstacle UK employees leave due to Brexit. Cybersecurity gap widened due to stricter regulations, and we tell you that regulations are the things that make that EU AI safe. Of course, lighter regulations are going to be unsafe. We haven't seen AI get that bad yet, but if you vote for them, that means we're going to have lighter regulations, and we don't know the impact of that in the future. TG 25 states that make EU leading force in AI. Most AI is low risk and exempt, but ban programs that infringe fundamental rights, unacceptable risk. Ban include social credit scores, deceptive techniques to distort behavioral criminal profiling. And we tell you that regulations are good for businesses. The AI Act fuels innovation, critical in gaining public confidence, which accelerates adoption. Clarity gives investors confidence, and a lifeblood of innovation. Create level playing field, promoting competition, improve quality. Then on the euro, no, they'll be able to negotiate for opt-outs. You have to remember that both EU and Britain were hurt by Britain leaving the EU, so of course they're going to want to advocate for something that benefits them. Remember that if the EU cares about opt-outs, then they'll offer external concessions. They might offer to pay extra membership fees. They can keep offering things until they get what they want. And vote us because it's precedent. We give you two warrants. A, Ireland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, they've all been able to negotiate opt-outs under the same Article 49 that they talk about. And we have incentives to, because the EU benefits from extra trade. The UK is one of the largest global economies. If giving them the pound if letting them keep the pound is going to bring them a better economy, of course the EU is going to do things in their better interest. Then, on trade deals, turn because the EU outweighs all trade deals. Parliament 25 explains that closer trading relationships are 20 times larger than combined effects of post-Brexit deals. Prefer us because we do the comparative between the two countries. And turn because we tell you that trade is higher in the EU. Per Bloom 25, it says that exports are 20% lower than 19 if they kept the pace, 30% higher frictions in the EU affects chains, and Brexit made exports industries less competitive. And we tell you non-unique because most of the deals are going to walk over anyways, so you'd rather have them be in the EU because they're going to be having the same deals. Walker 23 explains that of the 71 deals that the UK signed, 68 were identical when in the single market. So it's better to join the single market for other benefits and having to have better trade deals that are pretty much the same being on their own. And even if you don't buy those responses, we'll tell you that they can just advocate for these trade deals. Senator 16 explains that they're open to negotiations, and Poland just signed an independent trade deal with the U.S. That means that negotiating is a possibility. That's it. Yeah, there's like a 5-second grace, I think.
Yeah, that was like 10 seconds. Okay, before we do process, can I ask you? You talked about, you gave this card about how 68 of the 74 trade deals that you mentioned, 71 trade deals that you mentioned were identical in the EU. So could you send that card? And then, could you also give the, you mentioned like a couple times about how like the EU is like predisposed to give incentives to the UK because they were both affected. You mentioned
That was the analytic.
Oh, no cards in that?
No.
Okay. And then you also gave one card about how like one of our cards was about like a tech company. Did was that a card or was that?
That was indirect. So I read your evidence and I was able to see that's not the case.
Okay, so then let's send this instead.
Perfect. It looks like it just sent. The moment you get it, you can send it. Did you guys get it?
No. I think I did that before. Okay. So then we can start concepts?
Yeah, sure. I'll start.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to take the first question since you spoke first?
Yes.
Sure.
So in the rebuttals you mentioned how in the upcoming elections Sweeney won't be able to secure a majority in the Scottish Parliament. So would you agree that this means that he won't be able to secure a referendum?
Wait, I don't think I read that in rebuttal. Wait, can you repeat your question?
Okay, so in our rebuttal we said that Sweeney will not be able to secure a majority in the upcoming election. So do you agree that this means that he will not be able to secure a referendum for Scottish independence?
No, I don't agree with that. I said that victory ensures secession in our evidence. Yeah, that's the card. But can I like ask about your evidence?
Sure.
So on this like Sweeney evidence, when was this written?
Which one?
Sweeney won't be able to get won't be able to call for a referendum.
This is from August 7th, 2025. That's the Guardian,
Okay.
which says that according to the polls that we have right now, Mr. Sweeney is going to form a minority government.
Okay.
And as such, he will not be able to make a
Can I
referendum.
ask a question?
Sure.
So if you do you agree that like if we're all going to die, it's better to solve back for extinction than solve for like innovation, recession? Like would you agree that we have to solve for the highest magnitude income or like the biggest effect in the round?
Before I answer that, why are you asking that question? Because I don't think.
It's a hypothetical. It's just a question.
Okay, so I think. Okay, none of us have mentioned extinction impacts. I don't know where you're getting the extinction impacts from.
Okay, let me just say these are extinction impacts.
Okay, so then we already refuted all of your extinction links. Like I'm gonna say
No,
that.
you guys didn't say anything on extinction. You guys just like.
Yeah, we did. We refuted all of the links. We refuted BD link. And
No, you only said Starmer won't be able to. No, you only said Sweeney won't be able to get a referendum. Secession fails.
No. Your extinction is tied to the Somali thing.
Sure,
we
but on Somalia there was just one response. We can sort this out later. But yeah. There was just one response saying that Brexit didn't create a focus shift policy. Then you went to your case. That's not my fault.
Okay. Then you
Wait, did you want to answer my question again?
could I ask a question?
Okay. Wait, I asked you if like, do you think it's like important for us to solve for the highest magnitude?
No, my response to that is that extinction is like based on our responses, extinction is like unlikely or almost impossible, and as such, we need to solve for like the daily issues that people are facing right now.
Okay, like
Yeah, cause like you mentioned like several times ago, like ladder regulations are like bad for bad for AI regulations, and like it's bad for AI safety. But I don't really know what you mean by ladder regulations.
Okay. I don't remember saying like exactly that, but what I said is that UK regulations are more lax, and your evidence is from the Guardian, or I don't know if that's it's like from somewhere else, yeah. And it's from like tech companies that really like lax regulations because they can have the freedom to do whatever they want with no like safety risk at all. So I'm saying that it's better to have these regulations.
Our evidence is also from.
Okay, that's what I was saying.
Okay. So we have another 2 minutes to start. So start in 3, 2, 1.
So are you guys taking my phone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So we have 25 seconds after start. It says 1:35. So you go.
Okay. Hello and hello, Judge. I'm Akshay, and I'll be representing the summary for me and my partner. And the off-cam roadmap is that I will be starting on their case. Okay. So time starts, and I'll be starting on their case. Judge, the most important thing in their round is that based on the latest polls, Sweeney will not be able to secure a majority vote in the Parliament. He won't be able to secure a referendum. He has multiple cards stating that the SNP is not focused on Scottish independence. They claim that Starmer is a part of the SNP, even though this is clearly wrong. He is not. He is the leader of the Labour Party, and our cards show that the SNP has privately told him that they have dropped the independence demands. Previous nationalists all without success. SNP is unlikely to deliver. The UK government will not concede a referendum, while the SNP, while leading in this policy, while the SNP support only about a third of voters. Next May, not a coalition with majority. Referendum is doomed to fail and off the table. But the next Holyrood is fragmented, especially with Reform UK presence. Sweeney struggles to compromise, and he will offend, but likely face at least a challenge at some point. SNP's most prominent women stepped away. SNP dropped demands for independence. Sweeney instead focused on jobs, energy security, and the cost of living. Regardless of the Holyrood elections, he could not imagine a new referendum. These were both dropped by our opponents in rebuttal, and they are the biggest ties to their Scotland independence contention. Judge disregards the Scotland contention and its impacts as such. On Somalia, they dropped the most important part of our Somalia response, which is that ATMIS is funded by both the US and the EU. The US part is conveniently not highlighted or read as part of the ATMIS card. The card shows that both focus on other issues. Now let's move on to our cases. We state that as our cards show that the UK is focusing on post-Brexit, solving for the impacts as such. Judge disregarded all their disrespects. Now let's move on to our cases. We state that if the UK rejoins the EU, they will lose access to major tech AI systems such as the one that detects cancer cells substantially faster than doctors. To the statement, they say that rejoining the EU automatically makes British AI companies more innovative. But if the EU AI Act is focused on restricting AI development, how will the companies be creative and invent new life-changing or even life-saving mechanisms such as the one that the UK already has? Moving on, they dropped all of our cards about how EU regulations reduce AI innovation. The UK has framework for AI regulation. It's just more optimal and dynamic. Plus, if UK stance have diverged since Brexit, in what way would British industries meet EU requirements without massive compliance costs? On Euro, they claimed that opt-outs were secured by other countries, but this was 30 years ago. Our evidence shows that the UK could not secure opt-outs in the status quo. As such, all the impacts of the UK adopting the euro on their side is wrong. I mean, would stand on our side. And Judge, this is why
That was 148.
So how much got cut in the US?
We took 148 plus 40. So,
yeah, it's like 30 seconds.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. For a quick off-time roadmap, first I'll be going over our case and then their case and then to wait. Judge, are you ready? Okay. Extinction outweighs. If we're all dead, we can't solve any of their problems, which means it's a logical prerequisite. It affects all 8 billion people, so it outweighs on scope. Reject the blanket probability claims if they need a specific reason for why our scenario is not probable. If we win, our argument is 100% probable on the flow, and everything else is arbitrary. First, we win on magnitude because the recession and AI innovation does not outweigh the extinction that we provide. The prereq is that to stop for AI innovation or cancer issues, we all have to be alive first, so you have to vote for us. Judge, you should be voting for the highest impact in this round. They do zero weighting, zero comparative analysis, and you're stuck between both cases. Look at the weighing first. Our response is that they say that the Brexit hasn't caused the EU to change their reads, but read our evidence. That they say that both the UK and the EU, their response doesn't matter because our argument is that The UK is at the forefront of counter-terror efforts, and we know that once they rejoin, they'll be part of making those same funding decisions for the ATMS that the EU and the US are making right now. We are not cherry-picking our evidence, because once they rejoin, we know that the UK will be part of those like funding decisions for ATMIS. And we also stated that the Brexit caused for focus shift of UK policy. We know it is their fault, as Caesar 20 stated that Brexit forced the UK to develop new policies in Africa to mitigate economic trade effects, main instrument as UK's serious rival to the EU. Judge, I'll give you 3 places to vote for us. First is Somalia. It is game over for Somalia, as they conceded it, and the conceded nuclear war happens because of no counter-terror efforts, so we collapse on the Somalia case extension. So on Somalia, Brexit has distracted the UK away from Africa to focusing on econ and preventive cooperation with the EU. As a result, Al-Shabaab is increasing because of the one who entered of counter-terror operations. Historically, the EU is the top funder of counter-terror, but the UK was the one who convinced them to even fund it in the first place. Rejoining restores that influence and thus counter-terror funding, which prevents Al-Shabaab attack on America due to previous attempts, going nuclear due to American fear response and extinction through anti-gravitational effects, and a rise of water that turns the Earth into a dead planet. On Wayne, we win on time frame because the terrorist attack is coming now. ATMIS drawdown and sustained attacks pushed it to the brink. If we win on the UK that attacks right now, that means extension is in the status quo. It is a risk of solvency. We all die from terrorism first. None of their scenarios even matter. The impact is time frame because it is immediate, because terrorist attacks trigger a nuclear miscalculation to prevent future disruptions. The probability is that terrorists are irrational actors, so they're more likely to attack on the United States. They say we drop their responses on AI. No, we don't. They have zero frontlining. They dropped the turn. This is the second place you vote for us. They have conceded that regulations are good for businesses. As we state that UNER 24 states that AI acts fuel innovation, critical in gaining public confidence, which accelerates adoption, and the clarity gives investors confidence on creating a level playing field, promoting competition to improve equality. The last place you vote for us is on their conceded turns on trade. The EU outweighs all trade deals, as Parliament 25 states that close their trading relationship 20 times larger than the combined effect of post-Brexit deals, and trade is higher in the EU, as Bloom 25 states that exports 20% below 19 if they present 30% higher frictions with the EU effect chains. And then indeed 727 states that 50 deals need to make up for Brexit. So we went off Somalia to prevent extinction. Thank you. Vote aye.
So you claim that right now terrorists are leading to instability and that will lead to extinction. So what is the time frame for the argument? Like when is this?
Okay, so I
when
tell
is
you.
this
First
extinction?
it's like pretty much conceded, but you can answer.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, in my summary, I tell you that.
It's not conceded because we successfully responded to the amnesty.
No,
You guys dropped
you
it.
talked
No.
about no.
You
Okay,
dropped
wait.
it, sorry.
Your only. I'm sorry. Okay, so your only response to Somalia was that the UK, the EU, and the US are the top funders of ATMIS. Correct?
Yes.
Right? Why does that matter? Because once the UK, we're arguing that once the UK rejoins the EU, they're going to be part of the EU. The EU, you say yourself that the EU is the top. They're making the funding decisions for ATMIS. So once the UK, you say yourself.
No, we're saying that the two top funders are the EU and the US.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
No, you guys' impacts are based on not just the EU but also the US. So it's not unique because it's based on the US.
No.
This is what our argument has been on.
Wait, these are like late responses after.
No, they're not. We respond.
Okay, wait,
we
but let me clear it up for you.
in rebuttal and in summary.
There was no information there. Like, you guys just said the top funders. You guys didn't implicate it there in rebuttal, and you can't bring it up in summary.
Yes,
but we already told you that it doesn't matter even if they're the top funders, because our evidence that you guys have conceded tells you that the UK was the one that actually pushed them to fund it. It doesn't matter if the UK was the only one that funded it or if they did or didn't. It's the fact that they were the ones that put counter-terror at the top of their list and actually wanted to make sure that counter-terror was at the top of the EU. But we've talked about this for a minute and 30. Can we take a question?
Okay. Okay, so you talk about oh yeah, you talk about the secession not happening and the SMPs. Okay, wait, no. Let me ask you a different one. You talked about Brexit being new policies. What exactly are those new policies?
Could you clarify like new policies and what?
In your response to Somalia.
Okay, so basically our response to Somalia was twofold. So the first thing is your very first card, so 020, says that the UK is now focusing on new policy in Africa. Your own evidence says that the UK is focusing more on Africa. But then that is the new policy shift. That's your Cesar point card, which you mentioned in your
Wait, but
development.
they're not like focusing on like counter-terror or like other bigger issues at hand. Like whatever you found in our card just talks about how they're focusing on Africa. But specifically, our argument is that that we need to advocate for counter-terror. It doesn't matter if they're going to be worrying about Africa. Like they could be worrying about aid or other issues. But our argument is that counter-terror is at the very top.
The very first question I asked about time frame, you guys never answered that question about like.
Oh, okay,
yeah, I'll tell you that.
It's as soon as you vote out.
It's as because. Can you agree
So
that?
you're saying as soon as. Wait, no, I'm saying that if we go with the neg, let's say we go in your world, then when is this extinction gonna happen?
Okay.
Okay,
we tell you that terrorists are irrational, so they're going to be more likely to attack the United States when we're
that's cross. Yeah.
Oh.
So this is the 2-minute final focus speech on the next. So we got the roadmap. We'll be going over their case, articles, and then we make assumptions. Why should go for that? It starts in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so before we go on to their case, Judge, let's see the impact on our case. So on AI, we're saying that right now the UK is the dominant player in AI. That they're the third best in the world because they have a unique dynamic regulatory framework. They have regulations, but it's dynamic, it's proportional, and it's more applicable for these AI companies. It's both encourages safety while encouraging innovation. While the EU's regulations, they neither make anything safe, but they impose very strict regulations, which these cards, we have presented numerous cards on this, and they have dropped all of these cards. So we're showing that with this unique position that the UK has post-Brexit, they are developing these new technologies like the cancer technology that we've said, which can detect cancer 2.5 times quicker, saving tens of thousands of cancer patients. And then they are developing new technologies with the AI Growth Lab, which is helping reduce NHS wait time lists. Then they dropped a Eurozone contention and summary. We're saying that if the UK rejoins the European Union, they will have to adopt the euro. And with the euro, any interest rate changes is going to affect the UK much more than it will to other European countries, which will push the UK into a double-dip recession, which will push the UK into recession if wrong rate changes are made. So those are our impacts compared to their impacts. So on their impacts, they completely dropped our response to Scottish independence. In the summary, we talked about how Sweden will not be able to secure a majority government and with the next election, and as such, you won't be able to secure a referendum. This alone delinks all of their cards, all of their links, and it means that they have no impact for Scottish independence contention. And then on Somalia, the Somalia contention, we've already made a couple of responses to this. So the first one is that the very first card says that the UK is focusing more in terms of policy on Africa than they did pre-Brexit, and then also the two primary funders of the ACMIS are EU and the US. So the impacts of the loss of ACMIS on Al-Shabaab are not just solely due to Brexit, they're also to the US. So we cannot say how much Brexit has affected on ACMIS. This is what our argument has been all along. And as such, all of their extinction impacts that stem from the loss of ACMIS, you can disregard all of those extinction impacts if they provide no time for no probability for those. Vote on our real life impacts, which helps save British people, which helps support our ordinary British families compared to their far-fetched impacts, which we have won. So for those reasons, we are disqualified.
Okay, we have 30 seconds. Yeah. Remember that extinction always outweighs for all day be canceled for any of their problems, which means that's a logical prerequisite. It affects 8 billion people, so always on scope. At most, they affect 10,000 people from cancer. That's not as big as 8 billion. Always reject their probability claims. They just tell you in cross that's improbable. They don't tell you exactly why. And we're gonna be prereq because to solve for innovation or AI or any sort of cancer issues, we have to be alive first. That's why you vote for us first in the round. Then they tell you we have no time frame. Yes, we do. It's in summary. Terrorists are coming right now, and ATMI's drawdown and sustained attacks push us to the brink. That's the bringness right now. We're already winning the uniqueness. They've conceded that. That means that extinction is in the status quo, and it's a risk of solvency for the app. Then we also tell you that our impact is also has a really good time frame here because it's immediate. Terrorist attacks trigger a nuclear miscalculation to prevent future disruptions. All of their weighing is based on the very vague and broad numbers. They don't provide you any specific numbers. Or the people say, if we give you 8 billion people, it's clearly when there. But then, let's clear up this ATMI's funding debate. If it's too confusing, I'll clear it up right now. The net claims that we cherry-picked our evidence from our card, but our evidence doesn't, but saying that we talk about the US and EU, but our evidence says that the UK is at the forefront of counterterror. This doesn't matter as exactly what we're telling you. We're telling you that right now that the UK was for sure the biggest advocate for counterterror in the EU, and once they rejoin, they're going to continue to be the biggest advocate. It doesn't matter who's funding it or not. Of course, the EU and the US are going to fund it. They have more money than the UK. Then, we're winning case right here. Brexit has distracted the UK away from Africa to focus on econ and preventive cooperation with the EU. As a result, Al-Shabaab is increasing because of the end of counter operations. Historically, the EU is at the top funder of counter, but the UK was the one who convinced them to fund it. Rejoining restores the influence and thus counter-terror funding, which prevents an Al-Shabaab attack on America due to previous attempts, and going nuclear because to American fear response and extinction through anti-gravitational effects and a rise of water that turns the Earth into a dark planet. Even if you don't buy this argument here on AI, we tell you that the article is from CDW. It's from our regulations, from an article that likes light regulations. So that bumps everything else because of course they're going to advocate for lighter regulations. Then they drop the turn that regulations make EU AI safe. Every speech they've dropped the turn. We tell you Tiki 25 says that EU makes it leading towards an AI because it bans in social credit and it helps solve for deceptive techniques like criminal profiling and distorted behavior. Then they go for the EU really late in the round, but they drop the incentives that the EU would want to give them opt-outs because they're going to benefit from it. And the last place you vote for us is on trade deals. They've dropped both the turns that tell you that trade is higher in the EU, and they dropped that the EU outweighs on all trade deals. It's really clear. If you don't vote on the small land, vote for trade deals. It's really clear right here. Good round.
Good round.
Good round.
Okay, guys, that takes some time. Which card was it for focusing more on the policy of Africa than they did previously?
C720
Okay. Was it the rebuttal card or?
No, it was a card.
Oh, was it a re-highlight, indict thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that your answers in the rebuttal and summary don't really frontline the actual quarantine, because you didn't really have that many responses to it in the rebuttal and the summary. So I just feel like you need to have a bit more of that to be in a better place for the latter end of the debate. You guys don't really respond to the fact that like Brexit shifting like UK strategic advantage is bad. You just say that the US and UK are independent, but you don't exactly you don't really indict their evidence. You just say like that's not really true. I think you need to have a bit more analytics and potentially more cards if that's possible. You guys also say, yeah, so you can't say like the UK is focusing more on Africa now and then not specifically read a part of the evidence that says that, because I'm a bit confused and I can't really find that part like that you're speaking of. That's not really an actual warranted response to the AF's evidence. I also think that the AF wins time frame because they extend that like the 18 hour drawdown is already happening and that Al-Shabaab is something that is immediate. Like they say that like Al-Shabaab does not attack. The Nike don't really present a competing time frame. You just say probability, but I think that you need to have probability 92% time frame to actually have a strong argument that will actually work for you. You can't just say like we already answered this because that's not really weighing. So if you elaborated on that further, it could have been a different decision. But with nuclear escalation uncontested on both mechanism and immediacy, I think that the AF wins the case and the evidence is more intact. I also like really evaluated magnitude because they consistently stated that we are not able to increase innovation and protect like cancer patients if we want to due to nuclear war. And I think that that kind of went uncontested in the final focus. So if you spent more time on that, it would definitely be very beneficial to you. Also, on directional, I think AF wins directionality because of the escalation turn. Because you guys extend like the cancer detection evidence for AI, but then when they say that there's a less than 50% certainty to detect virus resistant disease properly in some of your final focus, you're just kind of rereading your rebuttal and constructive evidence. So I think you need to have a bit more flash over there. Yeah, so just use their argument because their train stands. And once their train stands, you guys can't access their harm, so AF just doesn't get there. And I think that Scotland becomes largely irrelevant since AF wins the other two major flows. And that debate was a bit messy, so I just kind of judge kicked it and decided not to evaluate it as much because I thought that the other two flows were a bit more important. So yeah, ultimately I just think that Nagu dropped a few key turns and you don't really frontline Somalia sufficiently. But AF, you guys did good in talking about magnitude and time frame. So that's why I voted for you.
Thank you, Jen.
Do you guys have any questions for me? Do you have any questions for me? If you guys have any questions, just feel free to email me. Because I don't know when parents